Chapter 31. The last of the No-No boys were shipped to Tule Lake, while some Yes-Yes families were transferred from Tule Lake to Poston. The camp changed after that. There were no more beatings. There were fewer arguments. All anyone thought of were the men who'd volunteered for the army. Waiting for Bull and Ichiro to leave for basic training was worse even than waiting after Pearl Harbor. Dozens of young men were shipping out soon. On many nights all across camp you could hear the goodbye parties or see the future soldiers with their girlfriends or wives crying in their arms. Auntie scarcely paid attention to Sumiko. One day Sumiko decided to take the bus to Camp 1 to visit her Uncle Kenzo and ask him whether she and Tak-Tak could live with his family. Looking at her camp from the bus, she was impressed and proud of how beautiful it had become. There were a couple of white administration types on the bus, and they were impressed too. "I never saw such beautiful gardens," said one. Camp 1 was so big and had changed so much since Sumiko's last visit that she nearly got lost. But she found Uncle Kenzo's place again. He was sitting with some men playing poker. As she hadn't visited since his birthday, he was surprised to see her. He certainly didn't look particularly happy at the sight. "What is it, Sumiko?" he said. He didn't even set his cards down. "Can I talk to you? We're in the middle of a hand." The other men stirred. "Are we playing cards or not?" one man said. Sumiko decided to ask Uncle Kenzo her question right then and there. "Can my brother and I live with you? Auntie is going to leave camp for a job." Uncle Kenzo frowned and finally set down his cards. Sumiko quickly lied. "She says it's okay with her if it's okay with you." He picked up his cards again. "The kids are going crazy in these camps. Go with your auntie where you belong." The other men chuckled. Sumiko felt pretty stupid as she walked out the door. On the bus ride home, she felt like she was an orphan after all. Instead of going to her barrack, Sumiko headed for the brush where she met with Frank and just sat outside until the sun set and she was too thirsty to stay out any longer. A couple of days later, at the goodbye party for her cousins and several others, friends of those who were leaving gave speeches about courage and strength. Sumiko just stood with her family. They hadn't spent time together in public like this in a long while. It was as if they had become a family again, so that they could say goodbye properly. Couples began to dance to a phonograph record. The weather was already warming up at night, and the room took on a sweaty smell. Ichiro danced with one of his favorite girls. Even when there was no music, they held each other and swayed as if the music were still playing. Then a reverend announced a surprise. A couple of the men would be getting married that night. Everybody cheered. Sumiko searched out Ichiro in the crowd, wondering whether he would be getting married. But two men she hardly knew made their way to the front with their future wives. The weddings took just a few minutes. Sumiko noticed Bull leaving the party. She followed him. Finding him standing near the fence outside, she stood next to him and stared out at the wild shapes of the mesquite trees. "Will you write me?" she asked. "Of course I will, once a week." He looked down at her. "Sumiko, do you really want to stay here?" "Yes." He lit a cigarette and blew smoke over the barbed wire. "Bull, what do you think about?" "What do you mean?" "I don't know. When you're walking or just sitting or working, or before you go to bed at night." "Sometimes I think about the farm," he said. "I wonder who works it now and who's taking care of your kusabana." He smiled at her. Sumiko thought it was sad that today there were things about the flower farm that Bull didn't know. "How long do you think the war will last?" "I don't even know who's winning," he said. Sumiko suddenly had a wild thought. "Someday, if you have a baby, can I pick out the name?" "I'll have to see what my wife thinks about that. But maybe." The party inside grew quiet suddenly, one of those random silent moments that can happen in a room. A strange fear washed over Sumiko, a fear she'd never felt about Ichiro. It was a fear that Bull would not be returning. She tried to imagine him as an old man, and she could not. With Ichiro, she could see him in her mind, growing older, raising the kids she knew he would have. She could see the wrinkles forming on his face. She saw the dapper old man clothes he would wear. But with Bull, she could imagine him in his uniform, but nothing beyond that. She shook off the thought. "I'll write you all the time," she said. "Do you want magazines? Don't waste your money on me." "It won't be wasted," she cried. He smiled one of his rare big smiles and pulled her close against his wide chest. "Sumi-chan," he said quietly. He squeezed her so tightly that she couldn't breathe. He loosened his grip. "I'll send you lots of magazines," she said. The party started to disperse. Auntie exited arm in arm with Ichiro. Bull joined them, and the three of them walked off together. That night, Bull slept outside by himself again, because he wanted it that way. From the doorway, as Sumiko watched him lying in his cot, she hoped he was thinking about the kusabana, blowing beneath a Southern California breeze, the scent wafting over the fields and into their home. Maybe the smell from her little garden here in camp was what had reminded him of their farm. It was April, her favorite month on the farm, full of promise and lukewarm winds. In the morning, nobody woke Sumiko up. She opened her eyes and saw Tak-Tak asleep in his cot with his glasses on. That was her fault. She usually took them off him at night, but she'd forgotten yesterday. She turned to check the light outlining the curtains. It looked to be about 7 o'clock. She shot up, completely awake. Bull's and Ichiro's cots were gone. Auntie was folding sheets, weeping. Did they leave? Stupid question, but she had to ask. Before Auntie could answer, Sumiko ran to the door and saw that the sun was already white. They said they were leaving at dawn. "Why didn't you wake me up?" she screamed. Auntie didn't reply, just kept folding sheets, lovingly, even holding the sheets to her face at times to smell them. Sumiko ran out to see the road. A truck was driving by spraying water to prevent dust from flying around later that day. There were no other vehicles in sight. She knew her cousins were long gone. She walked back to her barrack and noticed some papers on her pillow. There were notes from Bull about farming to give to Frank for Joseph. Auntie had put the sheets away and was packing the tablecloth, already preparing for the move to Illinois in 3 weeks.